Salutare! Salutare la toată lumea! Bine v-am regăsit la Garantat 100%. Invitatul nostru din seara asta este unul dintre cei mai cunoscuți scriitori israelieni de la ora asta, un autor cu renume internațional, câștigător al multor premii importante, dar și un constant militant pentru pacea cu Palestina. A studiat filozofie și teatru. Unul dintre fiii săi a căzut pe front în 2006 în războiul cu Hezbollah în Liban. Titlurile cunoscute cititorilor români sunt Un cal intră într-un bar, Căderea din timp și Excelentul până la capătul pământului. Cărțile sale sunt traduse în 30 de limbi. Domnia sa a sosit în România la invitația editurii Polirom. Doamnelor și domnilor, e o mare bucurie să-i spunem bun venit la Garantat 100% scriitorului David Grossman. Hello and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for having me here.
I will kindly ask you to talk more today about what's happening in the world, but without forgetting literature, without forgetting your point of view as a person and as a writer as well. Is the person one and the same with the writer?
For me, yes. Yeah. I think my way for me to understand the world and myself is through writing. There are so many things I can tell you I do not understand about the world around me, but I might understand them a little more if I write about them, or if I try to put myself, in the shoes of the people who are involved in the Middle Eastern drama, for example. I can try to look at this reality from the point of view of an Israeli, which is very easy for me, but also from the point of view of a Palestinian. I think the only way to really be in contact with reality is to see it from various points of view, to read the text of reality from various points of view.
In Romanian, we have, through the Polirom Publishing House, 3 titles. Falling Out of Time, To the End of the Land, and A Horse Gets into a Bar. Fascinating combinations in between theater, literature, poetry, a fascinating way of doing a personal poetry, which is very surprising at the first contact with your book. It is not very easy to be friend from the very beginning with your books. Are you aware of this fact?
Well, I am aware of that for some people, I think, because my books are demanding in the sense that I want my reader to go through what I'm going through. And I think that if you really want to be within your life, to be with capital B, you have to touch many layers of life. Some of them are harsh, are demanding, but I think if you are exposing yourself to it, it's also rewarding. As I said, for me, it's a way of understanding life. I think that throughout my life, I understood my life better through books that I've read. Most of them were not easy books, were not fast food books.
Right.
And there where I'm trying to get when I write. Yeah.
If we talk about Falling Out of Time, its personal dimensions, its literary dimensions, get a very, very present and important dimension nowadays when we look around and when we see what's happening in the world. A few minutes before meeting in this very place, I've just found out that you were in Paris when the bombing and the shootings happened over there. How was that?
Yes, well, I was invited to give a lecture to a circle of psychoanalysts there. And my wife and I, we have arrived on Friday afternoon, and very soon later, friends from Israel started to call us and to ask, "Are you okay?" And then we realized that something has happened, and we opened the television and we remained glued to the television for some hours, and I must say that even we who come from Israel and are experienced in scenes of terror and death and brutality, we were shocked by what we saw and the thought of this terrible crime against youth, against an air of freedom, against modernity and pluralism, a crime that was carried out by the people of ISIS. This is still shocking. I feel that even when we are here now, my wife and I, we are still a little overwhelmed and walking in this cloud of what we have gone through. And this, for me, it indicates a beginning of a new era. It's really something fatal that happened in Paris. I think maybe now the French people do understand something that they prefer to ignore even after the events of the Charlie Hebdo in last January or the event in the Jewish supermarket, that there is a declaration of war done by ISIS, done by the extreme fundamentalist Islam against Europe, against everything that Europe symbolizes, against the values of Europe and especially of France. And that calls for another way of standing vis-à-vis this reality. France and other countries in Europe can no more ignore the consequences of this attack, and they have to be prepared practically in terms of fighting ISIS, but also to understand that now they are fighting for their values, for their identity. How are they going to do it? How are they going to fight the fundamentalist Islam without fighting the Islam within France, which most of it is moderate and willing to be part of the French nation? How do you do it? How do you adjust to a situation that will become less democratic? Because if democracy wants to fight for its values, it has to be less democratic in a way.
You said that you were shocked when you found out what was happening in Paris. But you come from Israel. Can you still be shocked?
That's a good question. Well, apparently, yes, you can be shocked. First, by the magnitude of the event, of so many young lives who have been taken in such a brutal way. But even in Israel, and with almost every other killing, either of Israeli or a Palestinian, it is still shocking, and I think, in a way, it's important to remain shockable, able to be shocked. Otherwise, you really become totally indifferent for that, and you start... Right. When you become indifferent, you start to collaborate with the distortion of the situation. You start to see it as a kind of almost the bureaucracy of the conflict. And I don't want to be a part of this bureaucracy.
So many of my fellow compatriots have a rather blurred picture of what happens in the Middle East. But I will kindly ask you to make an exercise of defining a few words, a few key words from that world. But before that, I really feel like asking you something very precise. When you talk about that atmosphere you were in Paris, when you talk about the atmosphere you live in Israel, and when you think of literature, how do you define literature in comparison with very precise things? I mean, young people dying around you, in your very proximity, breaking news, people empathic, but sometimes a sort of mechanical empathy, not necessarily a human one. Where is literature in these moments, sir?
Exactly there, in the place where you feel that there is a language that does not really describe reality. A language that becomes thick, that becomes like a combination of cliches. the first thing that is being manipulated and distorted in an extreme situation is the language. It is manipulated and distorted and used by the government, by the army, by our fears, by our enemy. And it is so important to keep the precision of it, and not only the precision of words, but the precision of nuances. Because when you are in a reality that is so extreme, there is a tendency of thinking in a thick way, in a cliché-like way, in generalizations, in prejudices. So it's so important to almost challenge the language and challenge the people and challenge the reluctant consciousnesses of people, terrified people. They don't want to think in nuances because nuances are sometimes a kind of a burden. And when you are terrified, you want to dichotomize reality and to say, we are good, they are bad, we are just and right, they are wrong and evil. But of course, you deprive yourself of being in contact with reality if you think like that. You think with only the projection of your wishful thinking, of your nightmares. And I think the best thing we can do for ourselves ever in the most extreme situations is to be within these situations. And the best way to be is to formulate it with the thinnest and the most delicate and nuanced language. And then we are really confronted by reality. It can be also a harsh reality. It's not easy to take, but this is the reality. It's not a dream, it's not an illusion, it's not a wishful thinking. And for me, literature, and you asked before, where is literature in this place? It's really a way to reclaim our individuality from this situation, because the nature of such situation is that it confiscates your individuality. It makes you a part of a choir. And it's very tempting to be a part of a choir because you are surrounded by others, you think alike, you wallow in these thick liquids of togetherness. It's all wrong. All this is wrong. I mean, you have to face reality by yourself and you have to insist on your personal language, and you really have to redeem yourself from this situation. Because, part of the symptoms of our reality in Israel, in Palestine, in many conflictual areas is that after a while, after you are crushed by violence, you start to withdraw from the situation. You feel that you have no influence on the situation. You cannot even understand it. It's so complicated. Who is against whom? What is the fee of being in this situation? You start really, you withdraw, you become apathetic. Now, the trouble is that into this void between the apathetic individual and reality, this void never remains empty. There are all kinds of elements with very extreme and opinionated agenda that will pour into this void and will fill it with their ideas and their ideology, and they will dictate reality for us. This is the situation now in Israel and in Palestine and in Syria and in Lebanon. In all the Middle East now, you see how the more extreme, the more fanatic people, they are hijacking us, they are kidnapping us and dictate their views and their behavior on the greater and the more silent and the more paralyzed majority. And again, literature is a way to insist, not to allow them to take you hostage.
Sir, I will make a very precise reference, falling out of time.
Yeah.
Even in personal terms, this concerns me. It's a fascinating book. It's a fascinating way of telling a story, of formulating a story, and of addressing a story. Do you ever feel in a mechanical, dramatic situation when you think of the fact that literature addresses to a rather precise category of people? It's a captive category of people, people reading literature. Sometimes literature seems to be not quite so potent as it might seem. Literature reaches people we almost know. Probably it will never reach people it should reach. Do you ever think of that?
I absolutely disagree with you.
Okay.
I mean, my experience is different. and my experience is that even though my literature is demanding, as we agreed, yet from the reactions of people that I get in so many languages, are that it became relevant for people. I want to tell you a little story.
Please.
Okay, when I wrote a book that is called the Book of Intimate Grammar, and it's a book about. It's available in Romanian as well, and it's a book about a small family in Jerusalem, like my family. A very symbiotic family, full of anxieties, feeling a little uprooted, like a family of refugees, as my parents has been. Before publishing it, I thought it's only fair that my parents will read it. And I gave it to them to read. And my father read it and he said, well, David, it's a very nice book, but are you sure that people out of our family will be able to understand it? I thought it's really very, very sweet of my father. And now, whenever there is a new translation of the book coming from China or Japan or Finland, I come and I show the book to him and I say, you see, Abba, you see, Father, they have understood. They have understood because in a way, I think that when you really write about your small 1 square meter in your backyard, in the end, if you devote yourself fully to it, if you totally expose yourself to what you are telling, to the story you want to tell, it touches people in various places, in different places, and not only the people that are literary, not only them. We start with the literary people, and then, if we are lucky, it can infiltrate to other people as well.
Right, fully right. It'll never infiltrate to people who don't know how to read, sir.
Yeah, but about that, what can we really do?
Right.
I mean, yeah.
Yep. Sir, our exercise.
Yeah.
What is Hezbollah?
What is Hezbollah? Hezbollah, the meaning of the name is the party of God in Arabic, Hizb Allah. They are part of the population of Lebanon, Shiites. Lebanon consists of many clans and religions, and they are extreme, they are militant. Over the years, they grew to become the dominant power in Lebanon, the military dominant power. They waged war on Israel actually more than 9 years ago in 2006 when they have kidnapped 8 Israeli soldiers and killed them. Israel retaliated strongly, excessively strongly, and this created the war between us and them. They are affiliated with Iran. They are being fed by Iran economically, weapon-wise. And they are, as I've said, extremist, much more extremist than the majority of the Lebanese people want. The war against Israel brought or wreaked havoc upon Lebanon, and they still pay the results of it.
Is Hezbollah an entirely Palestinian organization?
No. It's Palestinian and Lebanese. They see themselves these days as the spokesman for the Palestinians. They believe that the Palestinians have been betrayed by other Arab countries and that they are the real head of the arrow, as we say, of the Palestinian case, and that they are the only ones who are able to fight with Israel. They are deeply and highly equipped with destructive weapon. They said that they can hit every point in Israel. And they, as I see it, contribute deeply to the instability of the Middle East.
What is Hamas?
Hamas is part of the Palestinian people. They are Sunnite. Hamas, the meaning of Hamas is religious enthusiasm. This is the meaning of the word in Arabic. They are located mainly at Gaza Strip. They belong to the more extremist, fanatic, fundamentalist part in the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people, roughly speaking, is made of the more moderate, more political part, which is the PLO people who are located in the West Bank. Hamas is in the Gaza Strip. Israel had 3 eruptions of war against Hamas in the last 6 years. Each one of them was a kind of a mini war. Again, they shot thousands of missiles to Israel. Israel retaliated and crushed, something like 1/3 of the buildings in Gaza. Yeah.
What's the difference, in very few words, the difference in between Shia and Sunni?
Well, they adhere to different leaders, religious leaders. Now the Sunnite countries, for example, like Egypt, like Jordan, are more moderate than the Shiites, and they are more dialogical. You know, they are more for a dialogue. And by the way, I think this is something it's an important thing. There is now a group of countries, Shiite countries, who are relatively more moderate in their attitude towards Israel.
Right.
And I think it's a good start for collaboration between Israel and these countries like Saudi Arabia, who is also a Sunnite, Jordan, Egypt, the Emirates. Not that they love Israel. Don't get me wrong. Israel was never really accepted in the Middle East. Israel was never internalized into the Middle East.
Yep.
And yet these countries now, they have some interest, and they are tied together with bonds with the United States. They have an interest both to solve the Palestinian question, because this will lower the flames under all conflicts in the Middle East, maybe not all of them, but some of them. And they are more prone towards a Western narrative, not too much, not to exaggerate in that, but there can be a dialogue between the West, Israel, and these countries.
Why are you against the war with Palestine and against the Israeli settlements in the territories?
Because I think that, I'll start by the fact that in the year 1948, Israel was established.
Yep.
Israel was established 3 years after the end of the Second World War. And for us, the Jews, the Second World War means the Shoah, the Holocaust, the destruction of more than 1/3 of the Jewish people by the Nazis. In an unbelievable and even miraculous way, 3 years after this terrible destruction, the Jews came to Israel from many, many countries and have created the state of Israel. It is, for me, really a miraculous event in history. I think it's one of the greatest human stories throughout history. The way that Jews poured into this land, which is our historic homeland, the place where we have originated as a people, as a culture, as a religion, as a language. And we were able to create there first a democracy, which is not taken for granted. Our parents and grandparents who came to Israel from Romania or from Iraq or Morocco or Egypt or Russia, they hardly heard about democracy, and yet we created democracy. And we created a culture and agriculture and industry and high tech and so many walks of life that allowed us to become a very promising country, allowed us to protect the Jews who came to Israel. Unfortunately, did not allow us yet to be what it was meant to be, and this is a home for the Jewish people. This is the great idea behind the creating of Israel, because, for me, one of the deepest definitions of a Jew throughout history was that a Jew is someone who never really felt at home in the world. Even in the most hospitable, friendly places, there was always a danger of being persecuted or attacked, always there was a kind of a readiness to be uprooted and leave the place, or being expelled, deported from a place. Israel is meant to be the home, the place where we feel comfortable and really part of the place. And Israel is not a home, and Israel will not be a home unless the Palestinians have their home. We are intertwined.
Yep.
The Palestinians, will not have their home until we feel confident in our home, and vice versa. Now, very soon after the Six-Day War, I will just explain, it's a war in 1967 when 5 Arab countries declared war on Israel, and the rest is history and geography and tragedy, because Israel, the small Israel, won over all huge Arab nations and occupied the West Bank and Gaza and Sinai. And very soon after, there were people in Israel with right-wing orientation, some of them with messianic orientation, who started to create small villages and settlements within the occupied territories of the Palestinians. Now you have to remember that they started in places that were holy, sacred for the Jewish religion. But politically, I regard it as a terrible mistake, because over the years they grew more and more, and they became one of the major obstacles, not the only obstacle, one of the major obstacles for future peace. For example, they make the drawing of a defensible and viable border between Israel and Palestine almost impossible. So in that case, if they prevent Israel and Palestine from achieving peace, I regard them as a danger for both Israel and Palestinian. And they, as I said, they make the achieving of peace to something very, very complicated and very clumsy. I don't want to say impossible, because I still believe peace between us and the Palestinians is possible. But it will be very, very problematic because of the settlements, and because they create a model of fanaticism and of a kind of chauvinism that is dangerous for Israel. You know, they wanted to put an exclamation mark on the legitimacy of Israel in the West Bank, and they put a question mark on Israel within our historic and legitimate borders before the War of '67.
I'll give you an example, which is a documentary called The Gatekeepers.
Yeah, I saw it.
Didn't it have any real impact that a few legendary characters of the Israeli Interior Secret Service expressed themselves directly, saying that the war with Palestine has to end?
Yeah.
So I find it very hard to understand the legendary people in the contemporary history of Israel with direct participation in this war. You cannot suspect them of being pacifists. Or, I don't know, leftists or something like this. There are famous people from a secret service saying that this war has to end. I don't know, it has no impact.
Well, I think it had an impact on those who are already impacted by them and influenced by them. Immediately when they express those opinions, they have somewhat marginalized and delegitimized by the government, by the Minister of Education, who fiercely attacked them. Well, you know, I think that most Israelis today, they react out of fear. And by the way, it's not only paranoia, we are really at risk. We live in the most unpredictable and violent region of the world today, so there are some reasons for our fears. But I'm afraid that the things that those 6 heads of the Secret Service of Israel, of what they said, it did not really have an impact in Israel. And I found it really significant that they are saying it. It's important that those things will be heard even if they don't have the wished impact. It's important to hear these people who daily struggled with security problems, who daily fought with the Palestinian people.
Right.
Who, if I may say so critically, they contributed, and not in a marginal way, to the escalation of the conflict, because they were so efficient and so professional in their job. They escalated the situation between us and the Palestinians.
Yep.
And my greatest question towards each and every one of them is, where have you been when you were in power? Why we have never heard you when you sat at your official chair and had such a power and authority? Why did you wait until you resigned from your job? But of course, it's the nature of things, and people are very reluctant to express their real opinions when they are in power.
You said that the writer and the person are one and the same.
Yeah.
How did you cope with the moment when your son died in the 2006 war with Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Yeah. So in this case, the writer will protect the person, and I will not tell you about things that I prefer to keep for myself, okay, and they should remain intimate. But I can tell you about how was it to go back to writing after that, after we lost Uri. Uri was the name, is the name of our son. And I was then towards the end of writing the book, To the End of the Land, where in a strange coincidence I actually wrote about a family who sends her son to a war, and we don't know what will happen to him, and there is a great fear to his future, as so many parents in Israel have experienced. We all live with this permanent anxiety for our children, as our parents experienced it when we were in the army.
Right.
And after it happened, I think on the first day after the Shiva is the 7 days of lamenting that we have in Judaism. And people come and comfort you by just being with you. And the day after, I went to my room, my working room, and I sat there waiting to see what will happen. Will I be able to write again? Because, when something like that happens to you, everything is broken. Everything. Nothing can be taken for granted anymore. And in a strange way that is even hard for me to understand now, the book that I was writing still remained solid. And my responsibility for it and for the characters still remained valid. And I, very soon after that, not in the first day and not in the first week, but quite soon, I started to feel this instinct of the writer to infuse life and warmth and passion and love to my characters. And I had to fuel them, to charge them, because this was my way for me to feel alive, I guess. And I had to give them anecdotes and biography and relationship. And I started to do it, and I started to feel that this is a way to act against the gravity of grief, and it's a way to feel within myself all the things that became pale after catastrophe. And there was this feeling that when I do that, maybe I'm not just a passive victim of what has happened. Of course I am a victim, because catastrophe hit me and my family. But I still have some room to maneuver to what extent I collaborate with this victimhood situation. And writing was a way to fight it, was a way not to feel that I'm totally passive, that I'm just a sitting duck a target for catastrophe. That, maybe catastrophe dictate my surname, but not my private name. And in my private name, I can still change things. And I learned many things in this period. One of them is that even in time of great catastrophe, still there is a liberty for the individual, and this is the liberty of calling things by your private names. You still formulate reality with your own words, not to accept the cliches that the world pours on you in such situation. And there is really, I felt myself to be, with all the terrible misfortune, I felt myself to be privileged to be able to write, because it is an act of choosing life. In every situation, when you write, when you create, you re-choose life. Each time you say, I am alive, I will find another nuance in the familiar reality. I will find a new combination of words, a new metaphor that suddenly will, when you find a good metaphor, suddenly the world widens. You feel more alive. This is the nature of creation. This is the nature of literature. And I think, as I said, I was privileged at least to have this ability.
There are mainly two ways of regarding literature, of seeing literature. One of them is the one you expressed. It's an act of almost mystical creation. It's somebody who expresses himself or herself. And that's all. It's about expressing yourself. There's also another perspective. Literature is a construction. Literature is a matter of, engineering words, engineering structures, engineering meetings in between structures. Is this second perspective totally strange to you?
It's not totally strange, but my outburst of writing comes from the first part. I write because I really try to document something that is chaotic and is wordless, and I insist on finding the ultimate nuances of this strange being that we all share. It's not that I know something. I just try to eavesdrop on some stream that goes within me, within people that I know, within my country, and I try to capture some of these crazy, contradictory streams and to make it mine for a second.
May I give an example of contradictory feeling that you expressed? An article full of emotion, full of human emotion, very honest, really very honest. You were talking about your personal perspective when you saw the Syrian refugees.
Yeah.
And suddenly, when you discovered grief, when you discover suffering, that was the key element that united human beings that were in a state of war, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
How was that moment, sir?
There is a kind of relief when suddenly again you redeem a human face from the monolithic face of your enemy. There is this moment, for years, for decades, we in Israel, we got used to regard the Syrian people, as almost the devil, exactly as they saw us. For them, we are the devil, but it's the other way around as well. And only the most terrible images of Syrians are stored in our bank of images, in our collective bank of images. We used to see them as warriors. I remember footage of female commando warriors of Syria eating snakes who are alive. Can you imagine something more diabolical than that? or the way they have tortured our prisoner of wars, the inhuman, terrible way. So for us, they were faceless, they were enemies. And suddenly, when you see them as refugees, when you see the human and intimate gestures, you see parents carrying their babies, you see them afraid, you see couples hugging each other.
Thinking of your own condition as a refugee.
Of course, I belong to a people, the Jewish people is the people of refugees. I look at them and I can feel, I can sense how they feel the earth is shaken under their feet. And this is an emotion that is similar to what we feel also in Israel. So for a moment, some of them, not all of them of course, but some of them, I understand, I see them as human beings. And I think that also for them, it is an opportunity for the Syrians to uproot themselves, to be really salvaged from this guillotine that they have been trapped in, facing us, regarding us. Suddenly, maybe when they come here to Europe, sometimes they are also helped by Israelis and by Jewish people. Maybe it's an opportunity for them to change their point of view. And in the end of this article, I ask the question, to what else are we blind for? Maybe, and I even don't have to say it, but maybe we and the Palestinians are blind in front of each other, and we do not really see each other as we should see if we want to solve the problem, because if you continue to regard your enemy as only as an enemy, you will always be trapped in war against him. There are some paradoxes, like this paradox that I try to formulate in this article, that a nation at war, like our nation, tend to elect warriors to lead it. It's natural almost. But the problem is that warrior and belligerent leaders, they almost doom their people to perpetuate war, because this is the dictionary they know. They don't know any other dictionary. So at some point you have to break it. You have to suggest another option of being in this life. And this option for me is the option of dialogue and of peace with our neighbors, because I don't want you to get me wrong. Israel needs to have a very strong army. Israel cannot be without a strong army to defend it. Because, as we said, the Middle East is very hostile towards us and very hostile towards itself. We need to be protected. But army alone cannot be the answer to the complexity of our being there. It should be a very strong army and having peace, because only both of them will be able to gradually reduce the flames under our conflict and to create slowly, hesitantly, carefully the agents of peace between us and the Palestinians. Right now they are only agents for war. But if we shall be clever enough and courageous enough, we shall have people and organizations and maybe common universities to Israelis and Palestinians, and football matches and theater festivals and literary festivals and conferences of doctors and physicians and lawyers and whatever. Gradually, the powers of health, of normalcy, of compromise, of common sense, they will surface, and they have a chance. It's not sure, but it's much more sure than what we have now.
So, my final question, although I could address thousands of questions, but do you think that, is it okay for a writer to talk about the way he or she is writing? I mean, some people could say, Mr. Grossman, the writer is a sort of a magician. That's a virtual quotation. It's not necessarily my point of view. The writer is a magician. Why do you show to the audience your magic hat? Because the magic hat has to be concealed and magic. It should be visible. What would you answer to that?
I like magicians who work with very short sleeves. there is nothing mystical in the way I write. I write about human beings. I'm a very practical and down-to-earth person, and I think that the magic rests in everyday life. This is magic, you know, the fact that we have children, that we have grandchildren, that a man and a woman has to live their life, and they want to live their life for 40 or 50 years and to discover each other and to change together. The way a child starts to understand the language, the way a child understands that this is a table and this is the chair and this is me and this is you. All these are magical things. So you don't have to be a magician. It's nothing mystical. It's just to really surrender totally to the magic of everydayness, to the magic of life.
So, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Privileged to meet you. Thank you for your books.
Thank you.
Tuturor celor care sunt alături de Garantat 100%, mulțumim frumos pentru încredere. Ne vedem data viitoare. Noapte bună!